As a child, I had a near-death experience. While hanging out by a pond with my brother and father, I ended up falling in. I was about 6 at the time, and didn't even learn to swim until I was 12. So, as you can imagine, I very quickly started to drown. In a panic, my dad immediately jumped into the water to save me, and although he did get me out, he too had to be helped out by one of the park workers. Thankfully, we both survived. Is what I would say on a good day. On a bad day, I would tell you that I died that day. A thought I even wrote about in my own feature-length film, America Dreamin'. In this video, I hope to explain this dichotomy. Inside Out is a good Pixar movie. Not really a great one in my opinion, and I haven't even seen the second one, but the Inside Out tapes, on the other hand, are masterful. And in just 2 episodes, it managed to perfectly capture the concept of false memories caused by psychosis, something I feel gets very little coverage. The Inside Out tapes are an analog horror series right here on YouTube, and I suggest you watch them, either before or after this video is over. Furthermore, this video will feature themes of the taking of one's own life, as well as psychosis as a whole. If you are not comfortable with those things, you may want to click off this video now. Okay? Okay. Traumatized. The first episode of the Inside Out tapes opens up on a screen of The Mind of Riley Corporation 2015, which I think is a brilliant little nod to the fact that all of these analog horror series usually start with tapes from some kind of government entity. This, of course, is all happening in the mind of Riley, the protagonist of Inside Out, with the emotions being the central characters. Riley has kept repeating the same memory over and over again. Here we are left to assume what memory this is, and given the title of the episode and video, we can assume it must be a very traumatic one. Right? We see that Joy tried to remove the memory, which makes sense given the plot of the first actual film, but it's also a representation of trying to cover up bad memories with good ones. We as humans often use joy as a coping mechanism, after all. But, as you can imagine, in this case, it was not successful. We then see the accident, the traumatic moment that supposedly caused all of these feelings. A car crash with a mysterious entity. And already we are starting to have some doubts. Is this series supposed to be supernatural? Like so many other analog horror series, are the events playing out due to godlike beings or even aliens? Entities from another world? Or does it more closely follow the film, where everything is happening inside of Riley's mind, as the opening scene of this episode might suggest? Now, I won't spoil anything yet, but just know that you'll be given my answers to these questions in this very video.
Have you ever wondered why you feel the way you feel? When everything in your life makes no sense.
Ah yes, when everything in your life makes no sense. If you've seen even just a few of my more recent videos, you will know this. I have schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type specifically. Even if you've only watched the introduction to this very video, I'm sure this may not be a surprise to you. For those who don't know what schizoaffective disorder is, it's essentially a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder, typically broken down to depressive type and bipolar type. I, of course, have the latter. Have you ever wondered why you feel the way you feel? Every day, my distorted voice friend. I have to wonder how it ever got to this point. Why everything is so painfully boring. Why everyone around me is shapeshifted into monsters to where I can barely recognize them. I think to myself, will this hell ever end? And dear viewer, I don't have the answers to those questions. I find it incredibly interesting that the entity inside of Riley's mind, whatever it happens to represent, goes after Joy first. This sadly is a reality for so many people. Even just with something like depression, it's not usually an intense sadness that you feel, but rather an emptiness, a joyless life. This concept is broadly termed as anhedonia, and it is an inability to feel pleasure or joy even from activities that would normally produce those things. Many people that don't experience this phenomenon may tell you to just stop feeling sad, mind over matter. And if this concept describes you, just know that it's okay. You're allowed to feel empty without others telling you to brighten up. I'm not telling you to give up completely on happiness or joy. There are treatments out there, but you should realize that you have, in many cases, a chemical imbalance that causes this. An imbalance we don't completely have figured out, but one that I've made it my personal mission to eventually solve. Even with my own condition, the antipsychotics I take for it can even sometimes lower dopamine parts of the brain that, to put it extremely simply, produce joy. And while this certainly does not mean stop taking your medications, you almost certainly need them, it does mean we need to look at different psychiatric treatments in the professional level, which again, I do want to tackle head on. But in the current moment, it's okay to accept your current reality, and accept it as only the current reality, not the rest of your life. It's also of note, continue with the tapes, that after joy is let out of the jar, that two emotions specifically are outright killed: sadness and anger. And again, I think this goes back to specific symptoms of mental disorders like depression, or probably more specific to this case, schizophrenia, and other psychotic disorders. Apathy. This is, like anhedonia, the inability to feel really any strong emotion at all, which would, of course, include anger or even sadness. Again, feeling depressed or experiencing the negative symptoms of schizophrenia are not necessarily an overwhelming sadness, but rather is typically more of an emptiness. Like you're coasting through life without motivation, and without emotion. God only knows how heavily I relate to this, as even if this video does well or does poorly, hopefully not though, I will probably not feel much of anything either way. And this is interesting, and kind of a dangerous line of thinking. We need to strike a balance here between accepting your mental health disorder as to not drive yourself crazy fighting it, and also realizing that it may not always be this way. Sometimes I truly don't feel emotions much at all, just on a natural neurobiological level. But other times, albeit less often, I think I don't let myself feel those emotions, for whatever reason. It's probably because I'm stuck in the mindset that I already won't feel them without ever realizing that things are really that black and white. It's not like I never experienced joy or sadness, and I'm learning to be okay with that. Just as I had to learn to be okay with not usually feeling those things. Fear and anxiety. That's all who was left. And honestly, dear viewer, that's usually all that I feel. A deep despair, fueled by those two. I fear everything. I am anxious around everyone. And I'm not sure what to do with that. Except there is one more. 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐤. I probably pronounced that wrong. Boredom. Mental tiredness. This above all, is what I feel. A painful boredom. And I am beyond tired.
Oh, my dear Riley, you know very well that without them you are nothing. It's time to make some changes. It's time to drop everything. It's time for a new idea.
We begin the second episode of the Inside Out tapes with a conversation between Fear and 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐤. Fear questions what that thing even is, showing it almost certainly isn't an emotion, and we have 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐤 discussing how hard it is to shoot someone. It's interesting having 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐤 be the one having to kill the other infected emotions, as they're the emotion that most dominates my own mind, the mind of a psychotic person. Fear has an idea to reach the end of the mind, to which the crew agrees to. As they walk, they encounter another emotion, one that I admittedly am unfamiliar with. I think it's embarrassment though, as I haven't seen the second film. Fear tells them to stay away, and surprisingly they do. Anxiety questions why this is, to which Fear simply states, remember what happened to sadness. I'm not really sure what this means, to be honest with you, but it is interesting to see that anxiety is blinded. Almost like how anxiety in real life almost blinds us to the objective truth. We obsess so much over what ifs and things that could come to pass that we don't see what is actually in front of us, and what has actually happened or probably even will happen. 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐤 was shocked at what they had to do. And of course it was joy that attacked them. Oftentimes I feel like I need to force joy into my life and erase all other emotions. This is of course a response to me not really feeling joy, and is very in line with the messaging of the first film. I will note, and this is a very recent development, that I'm done with saying I can't experience joy. I think it's a self-defeatist attitude, and I've come to realize I can feel it, just not as often as others. I think with mental illness and schizophrenia and depression specifically, you have to draw a fine line between realizing you have a medical condition and a chemical imbalance that makes you deeply unhappy, but also not going so far as to not even let yourself feel joy when that emotion does inevitably arise at times, which we've been talking about as the video has gone on. We see joy confirm that whatever is infecting everyone, that it's not an emotion. So then, what is it? Well, we'll try and answer that near the end of the video. It's important to note that whatever it is, it's assumed to have been present even before the accident, meaning it's not some trauma response. As Joy points out, it was here months before. Again, this brings into question the very nature of this accident that supposedly took the lives of Riley's parents.
This.
False thoughts, you say. Interesting.
This.
Fear points out the false thoughts, and anxiety holds the thought of the accident in their hands. Was the accident itself a false thought? That alarm. I've heard it before. Has Riley tried to take her own life more than once? Let's hope a miracle can save Riley. The second episode's title, as film theory points out, is a Caesar cipher. It translates to the Spanish word for psychosis, and I think that alone tells you everything you need to know. The accident wasn't real. Well, maybe a minor accident happened, but Riley's parents having died in it? It's all a false thought. And if you've been following along, that much seems rather obvious. That Riley suffers from some sort of psychotic disorder. Bipolar with psychotic features seems to be the most canonically accurate, as one of the teasers for the series is, well, quite literally named bipolar. Schizoaffective bipolar type could also be at play here. But instead of telling you a story that you've probably already pieced together, I instead want to give you my unique perspective. As I stated in the cold opening of this video, I, on my bad days, believe I died in an accident that occurred when I was a child. I believe I drowned. This, in my own mind, is a false thought, just like Riley has in her own head. Memories are really weird. I've discussed how psychotic disorders, and dopamine more specifically, can influence memory in my Explaining Away Psychosis video, so I won't rehash it here. It would take at least 30 minutes to do so anyway. However, what I will say is that delusions can go so far as to completely overwhelm our very memories, making us believe that things happened that didn't, and even make us question our very reality. We view memories based on an assumption that they actually happened. When we look back at a good time in our lives, even if it was like 10 minutes ago, we can embody ourselves in that memory. We have a foundation, the present moment. And all memories are is a recollection of things that the brain has stored inside of it. When someone lacks that foundation, it's easy to have false memories, as the brain has simply stored something within itself that didn't actually happen. A false thought, if you would. Questioning present reality is hard enough, but when we have to also question our past, we have very little to base objective reality on. Riley truly believed her parents died in an accident. And this can seem confusing to people that don't experience psychosis themselves. Like, can we assume she had just seen them earlier that day? This, I think, comes down to a problem of self-awareness. Having none of it is obviously a bad thing, no one is questioning that. But I've heard it said that suicide rates among schizophrenics specifically is actually higher when they have some level of self-awareness. That mainly boils down to them being just aware enough to realize the hell that they live in, but not aware enough to actually, do something about it. But in this case, the self-awareness problem manifests in that Riley is probably aware to some degree that she experiences psychosis, so she may believe she is hallucinating her parents being there. This, combined with her delusional nature, can result in her literally sitting and eating breakfast with them without ever realizing that they are real, and that they aren't already dead. She has to doubt her everyday reality, so much so that she can't be certain the people in front of her are real. And little voiceover note here, visual hallucinations are very not as common as auditory, but Riley could believe, not really understand that. So she could believe she's hallucinating her parents physically in terms of sight and obviously sound. There's also the possibility that she sees her parents as imposters or replacements of some sort, as if her real parents died and these are just stand-ins from the government or something. I'm not sure I believe this theory, as she questions the existence of her mother as soon as she sees her, and if she believes she was replaced in some way, I don't think Riley would have reacted like that. It's still worth considering though, as 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐤's delusions, a variant of delusional misidentification syndrome, is not uncommon with those with psychosis. This is when, like I've said, a delusional person believes a loved one or multiple have been replaced with an imposter. And delusional misidentification syndrome is a very broad term, so it covers a lot of delusions that are sort of similar to that. Capgras being one of them, obviously. Riley may also see reality as being, well, not real. I know during my manic episodes, I literally believe I am God, and that death and life are completely inconsequential. So wouldn't it be a stretch to say that Riley, who presumably suffers from either bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder bipolar type, could experience a similar thing? We can honestly theorize all we want, but I don't think we'll get these answers until the next episode hopefully comes out. I hope I've given you a unique perspective on these tapes and Psychosis as a whole. I want to end this video off with one thing and one thing only. That life is worth living, even if it may seem like it's not. And, as always, thank you for watching.